All right, let's dive into an absolutely fascinating mathematical framework. In today's explainer, we are exploring a theoretical architecture that suggests the cosmos isn't just made of physical matter, but is actually a repeating mathematical structure known as the Braided Infinity Tower. We're going to see how a simple, repeating arithmetic loop might just decode the echo of the Big Bang itself. Now, what if the static you see on an old television set, that random chaotic snow, was actually a perfectly calculated mathematical braid? It sounds kind of like science fiction, right? But today, we're unpacking a formalized theorem where a really simple +1 calculation scales up level by level to map the very fabric of reality. It literally connects basic counting principles directly to advanced concepts like string theory and cosmic radiation. So let's start with section 1. Unlocking the braided infinity and the cycle of 3. To really wrap our heads around this universe-spanning code, we have to start at the absolute smallest unit. In this model, the foundational movement is called the Cleanan. Basically, think of it as taking a single step forward, defined mathematically as just +1. And this tiny little nudge acts as a continuous perturbation, generating a cycle within what the source code calls a bullet lattice, which is essentially the base grid of reality. Now here's where it gets interesting. This +1 step divides perfectly into 3 equal slices. The Cleanan step continuously loops through 3 very specifically defined states: waste, opportunity, and diversity. By using basic modulo arithmetic, basically clock math, where the numbers wrap around, this creates a perfectly closed phase 3 cycle. And this brilliantly illustrates an absolutely unbreakable rule. If you iterate this cycle exactly 3 times, you achieve a complete loop. If you take just 1 or 2 steps, well, you're left stranded. But a full 3 steps, that returns the system precisely to 0. This rule of 3 is the absolute bedrock of the entire structure we're about to build. Moving on to section 2, stacking the braided tower and self-similar cycles. So what happens when we start multiplying these base cycles together? Well, the code builds what we call a braided tower. Just by prepending a new factor, you multiply the phase count. For example, a single cycle of 3 is called a triton. Stack a 3 and a 2, you get a 6-phase hexon. Stack 2 3s, you get a 9, an ennead. The whole structure scales up endlessly, building these massive, self-similar architectures out of really simple multiplication.
Now, you might be wondering, does it ever stop? The short answer is no. This mathematical tower is unbounded. There's absolutely no finite ceiling. But here's the kicker. It isn't just expanding wildly out into nowhere. Instead, it perfectly saturates an already existing limit, known as the braided asymptote. Think of it like a fractal that gets infinitely more complex, but never actually grows past the borders of the page it's printed on. There is only one infinity here, and the tower is already inside it.
Let's climb a bit higher in section 3, string theory signatures, the walls of the tower. As we move up this tower, it's wild to see how this escalating arithmetic starts to directly mirror advanced physical theories. By stacking factors of 5 and 2, we hit a phase 10 cycle. And remarkably, this elegantly aligns with the exact 10 dimensions required by superstring theory to function without anomalies. No way, right?
And it doesn't stop there. Just one step over, stacking the math slightly differently hits a phase 11 cycle, which perfectly matches the 11 dimensions required for M theory.
Scaling up even further with factors of 13 and 2 yields a phase 26 cycle. And you guessed it, that maps directly to the original bosonic string theory dimension count. It's like a mathematical perfect match. But I want to add a really critical caveat here. The code treats these phase counts, 10, 11, 26, as mathematical signatures, decorating the walls of the tower, rather than physical derivations forcing those dimensions to exist. These specific numbers are simply distinct structural landmarks on an infinite mathematical skyscraper. Which brings us to section 4, the cosmic resonance, mapping math to reality. So we've built the math, right? But how does this abstract framework actually connect to what we physically observe in the universe? Well, the source code outlines a grand unification through 3 primary principles. Let's break down how these abstract braids map directly onto cosmic noise and radiation, showing how the math literally becomes the universe.
Principle 1 categorizes universal background noise using, again, simple multiplication. It shows us that white noise equates exactly to a phase 10 cycle, defined in the code as kinema, which is literally just a Cassine braid of 2 multiplied by a primitive of 5. Meanwhile, pink noise maps to a saturated phase 30 cycle. The very noise of the cosmos is categorized by these simple stacked factors.
Principle 2 takes this and scales it up. It takes the phase 12 aeon braid, multiplies it by that pink noise 30, and produces exactly 360. And just like the 360 degrees of a full circle, this framework doesn't view that number as just a geometric angle. It maps it directly as the intensity of our cosmic background radiation. That is a huge connection.
And finally, Principle 3 explains that iconic visual we talked about earlier. You know, that 1% static snow you see on an old analog TV screen between channels? Physicists have long told us a fraction of that is leftover radiation from the Big Bang. Well, this framework mathematically proves it out. It's the 10-phase Konoma braid squaring itself. 10 times 10 equals a value of 100, which is represented in the code as plarimatic closure. The static is literally just the math resolving itself perfectly to 100.
Let's wrap this all up in Section 5, the grand synthesis, resolving the noise.
By starting with nothing more than a simple +1 loop, we have mathematically categorized the echo of the Big Bang itself. And this brings us to the ultimate thesis of this explainer. The braided infinity tower is the structural God signature that resolves all perceived noise. What we perceive as random universal chaos or evolution is simply the process of climbing this self-similar tower to a higher resolution of understanding. So I'll leave you with this. Is the universe a physical place we are measuring, or is it simply a mathematical calculation we are currently living inside? Thanks for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the code behind our cosmos.